Okay, this video is going to go over the SketchUp Greenhouse assignment. And so just looking at the instructions here of what this assignment is going to entail, we are going to create a greenhouse primarily from the plans that have been provided at howtospecialist.com. So please make sure you click on that link, kind of look at these plans that have already been shown on this website. We are going to tweak them a little bit for our own SketchUp design, but we're going to primarily use what has already been given here. A little note too is that we are going to use actual sizes instead of nominal sizes. So keep in mind whenever we see something like a 4x4, it's actually going to be 3.5 by 3.5. And when we see a 2x4, it's actually going to be 1.5 by 3.5. So this is basically what our building is going to look like, and there are also some screenshots provided in the instruction file itself for what it's going to look like. But we'll just start off with building our base here, which is going to be 10 foot by 14 foot. These anchor stakes are going to be optional extra credit, but I will show you how to do them kind of later on in the video. We aren't going to go into as much detail as what's being shown like through all of the joinery details, because in my opinion, SketchUp is much more of a conceptual software to get ideas across, and then we can bring it into AutoCAD or Revit for a lot more of those details. So when we are in SketchUp, we want to make sure that we are using the architectural template, which is the one that's in feet and inches. Again, mine's the first in my list because I have it favorited. Yours might not be the first one in there. When we open up our template, there's also a couple of things that I generally like to do in order to make it work a little bit nicer, a little bit faster, is open up my large tool set and especially open up my views tools here. So to edit that, we're going to go into our view tab up at the top and click on toolbars. And then the toolbars that I recommend having is the large tool set, which will open up here on the side. And I also recommend the views tool set up at the top. Not required, just I find super helpful. I also do have a couple of other toolbars up here of either extensions that I've downloaded or just things that I use outside of a project like this one. Next, what we also want to change is our camera. So I'm going to adjust the camera from a perspective style to a parallel projection, which is just going to make it a little easier when I do things like switch my views to move from looking at something from the side or looking at something from the top, because it is going to get rid of all of that projection. And then I'm going to delete this guy here because he is just going to get in my way a little bit while I'm drawing. So I'm just going to click on him and then hit the delete key on my keyboard to erase him. And as a little bit of a review from class, to move around in SketchUp, you can use your scroll wheel to zoom in and out. You can use the scroll wheel if you click it like a button. It will turn into the orbit tool and you can move around three-dimensionally. And then if you hold shift and the scroll wheel down, then you can pan a drawing around to move. So it's the opposite of Revit and the opposite of AutoCAD when it comes to those controls. So the first thing I'm going to do in order to draw my object is I'm just going to draw a rectangle for that 10 foot by 14 foot base. When we start typing in measurements, they are just going to feed into here automatically, so we will be able to see them. And it's always a good idea too to start your drawing based off of this origin point. So that way we know if we're drawing something or pulling something straight up, drawing something completely flat on our depth axis, our width axis, and our height axis. So I'm going to draw a rectangle, which is keyboard shortcut R, or it's this button here in our tool set. And I'm just going to start it on that origin point, and I'm going to pull in a direction, making sure the rectangle stays blue when I pull it. And then I'm going to type in my distance, which is going to be 10 foot, comma, 14 foot, enter. And that will make my 10 foot by 14 foot rectangle. What I'm going to do next then is pull this in for the measurement of the 4x4 that is making up this base. So I'm going to use the offset tool for that. So I'm going to hit space to go back into my selection tool, and then offset is either keyboard shortcut F or this button right here. And I'm just going to click on this rectangle, bring my cursor in, and type in my amount, which is 3.5, which I can type as you see in this bottom corner. When I go type it, I can do 3.5, or I could do 3 space 1/2. I don't have to put that quotation mark there for the inches. What I can't do is do a 3-1/2 because it's actually reading that as 3 minus a half. I usually do decimals, so I'm just going to do 3.5, enter. And that has brought that in 3.5. I'll hit space to exit the tool. I'm just going to pan over, so I'm going to hold shift in my scroll wheel. I'm just going to take this inner rectangle and delete it because I don't need that anymore. My next step is I'm going to push-pull this base up. So I'm going to use my push-pull tool, which is keyboard shortcut P, or this button here. I'm just going to click on that base head, and I'm going to bring it up 3.5. So it's just similar to AutoCAD. We click on what we want, move our cursor in the direction we want to go, type the distance we want, and then enter. And so I've made that base part. And now what I want to do before I start putting in my studs and things like that is I'm actually going to group this into one solid piece, so that way it's not going to get changed or altered as I start to build kind of other features on it. So I'm going to hit the space bar to end the push-pull tool. And I'm just going to click somewhere off into the side and just do a big window selection of my whole piece. So I just clicked and dragged. You have to drag it, you can't just release. And then I'm going to right click on the object and I'm going to say to make this into a group. And so it's no longer has any of those dotted little surface on any of the faces because those are now no longer faces. They are a part of this group, and the same thing with those edges. If I wanted to edit any part of it, I just have to double click on it, and then I will be allowed to edit things like edges and faces and move it around. And then I would just double click off of it to stop editing it. Super duper recommend grouping everything as you kind of make each solid piece, so that way you don't accidentally move or mess some things up in the future. So next we will just paint this into a different color. I find also painting things as I work a little bit of a helpful technique to understand what is one piece versus what is another one. So to use the paint bucket tool, it is keyboard shortcut B or this button right here. And when you go into paint bucket, your tray here should then kind of tell you, or this will pop up with your different materials. So I'm currently in the material category of glass because that was the last material I ever used when I last opened SketchUp. But I'm just going to go into the colors, and all I'm going to do is pick like darker shade of brown for this, some lighter shade of brown for my framing. I'm not going to be too specific on it. I'll pick this one, and then I just need to click on the object I want to color. Because this is all one group, every piece of it's going to color automatically, which is great. That's kind of what I want in this scenario. If I wanted individual faces colored, I'd have to hit space to get out of this tool. I can double click on it, which again will give me that kind of highlighted box. And then I could go back into the paint bucket tool with keyboard shortcut B. I could pick a color, and I could color individual faces instead of just the whole group at once. Not what I want to do in this case, but again, I just want to make sure I'm showing you that things can potentially be done. So I'll hit the space bar to get out of this tool, and I'll just double click off of the object to get out of it. So we have our base here. Again, we're going to ignore a little bit of these joins or these joints going on here, and then we can get working on our walls. One thing of note is that in these instructions, they do have the joist spaced 22¼ I found that 21 inches worked better to evenly space all of these around. So just kind of keep that in mind as we work through it. But we're just going to start with a wall that is 14 feet long and 6 foot tall. And that 6 foot is going from the stud only. So it's not counting the bottom plate or the top plate in this wall. So the first thing I'm going to do is put down a bottom plate and then make it into a group. Then I'm going to put a stud, space it out, or put a stud, make that into a group, space it out, and then put in my top plate. So every single piece I'm doing, once I make a solid, I'm going to group it as I go. So I'm going to go into the rectangle tool, which again is keyboard shortcut R, or this button here. And I'm just going to start from this point. I'm going to zoom in, again, making sure that my rectangle stays blue, because that means I am flat on this face. And I'm going to make my length 14 feet, comma, 3.5. And I don't need to put the inches. It's going to assume inches unless I say something else. It's clipping a little bit into that base part because they are technically sharing the same spot. So then my next step is I'm going to push-pull this up 1.5. So that's keyboard shortcut P or this button here. I'm going to click on this face and I'm going to pull it up 1.5, enter. Now, before I start spacing out studs on here, I'm going to want to group it. So I'm going to hit the space bar, orbit myself around a little bit to get the best vantage point to select only this piece. So I'm going to hold the scroll wheel to orbit. And then I'm just going to draw a box kind of this size here. What I don't want to go too large because I don't want to select any of this. And I also don't want to go right to left because this is going to give me a cross selection, which will select this. So I'm just drawing kind of a skinny box around here to only get that part. Right click, make it into a group. I always kind of want to group things as I'm working so that way I don't accidentally edit them later on down the line if I don't intend to. And if I do intend to, I can always just double click on it. So next, I'll start putting in my studs. So I'm going to draw a new rectangle, which is keyboard shortcut R, or this button here. And I'm going to keep it flat on this face. So again, I want to make sure that I'm keeping that rectangle the color blue. And I want to make it 3.5, comma, 1.5, enter. So this is going to be one of my 2x4s. I'm going to use the push-pull tool. So I'm going to go keyboard shortcut P, or this button here. I'm going to pull this rectangle up, so moving my cursor up, and then I'm going to type 6 foot, enter. And if you have been paying attention to my, trying to guess what I'm going to say next, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group that. So I'm going to pan myself over, hold shift in the scroll wheel a little bit, and orbit myself to a vantage point where it will be easy to select just that piece. I'm going to hit the space bar to get into the select tool. And I'm just going to draw a tiny box right over that stud. And then I'm going to right click. I'm going to make it into a group. So that way will be a little bit easier to copy and paste along as I go. So what I did before I placed any of my studs along this wall was I kind of spaced out some guides in order to do that. So I could just make sure that I'm going to have some even stud spacing happening here. Because of the fact that this is a fairly small structure and going to be operating as a greenhouse, we can have our spacing a little bit wider. So I used my guide tool to kind of help me make sure everything was going to work out on this plan or on this building. So I used the tape measure tool, which is right here or keyboard shortcut T. And I'm just going to draw a guide from this side. So let me actually space out and I'll show again. I go into T. I'm going to click on that edge, move my cursor towards the right based on how I'm looking at it, making sure that that arrow coming off this guide is staying green. And then I'm going to do one 21 inches, enter. And this is just going to be somewhere to tell me where I can put the center of my next stud. So I go edge to middle. I'm going to hold the shift key and the scroll wheel down so I can pan over. Then from this guide, I'm going to click on this one over, making sure I'm getting that green line. Another 21. Click on this one, make sure I'm getting that green line. 21. Enter. Always making sure whenever I'm using guides that it's staying a color. It's either going to be green, blue, or red, depending on which way you're bringing your guide. But you never want it to just be kind of a blank black, because it could technically be going any direction then. 21, enter. I'll pan myself over a little bit more, making sure that's staying green. 21, 21. And I believe the next one is, if I do 21, yeah. So if I do 21, the very last stud ends right on the money. So that is the stud spacing I want, not what they mentioned as the 22.4, but that's okay. So now that I have these as just references for where to copy my different studs into, I'm going to hit the space bar to get out of the tape measure tool. I'm going to click on this stud group that I made, and I'm going to use my keyboard shortcuts to copy and paste it. So I'm going to use Control C to copy it after I've selected on it, and then Control V to paste it. And I'm just going to put it somewhere. I'm not going to try to put it right on the money. I'm just putting it somewhere for now. When you copy and paste, it puts you automatically into this move tool here. And this is where I could grab it by the middle of that stud, and I can then put it on the middle of where that guide sits. So I can paste again. Since I already have copied this, I can just do Control V to paste, place it somewhere. Then I can grab it by the point I want, put it on the point that I want. So I can kind of keep just pasting them too. I've got another one it looks like I might have pasted twice. So I'm just going to grab it by, whoops. I'll hit the space bar. I'll click on this one. I'll go into Move, which is keyboard shortcut M. I'm going to grab it by the middle of the group and paste it onto that intersection. And I'm just going to keep copying and pasting it all the way down. So Control V to paste. I'll place it here. I'm going to grab it by that middle, put it on that point. Control V to paste. Just place it somewhere for the time being. Grab it by that middle, put it on that point. Control V to paste, place it somewhere, grab it by that middle, place it onto that point. Control V to paste. Hopefully you're getting the gist. And then this one, Control V to paste, place it. I'm going to grab it by this corner and put it on that point. And so now I have those joists, or excuse me, those studs placed evenly across this wall. My next step would be to make my top plate, which I could do in one of two ways. One would be, if I hit the space bar to exit this command, is I could draw a rectangle using keyboard shortcut R, and I could draw one all the way across here. So I'm going to hold Shift in the scroll wheel and just making sure it's staying blue. I can draw that across. P for push pull. Grab this, bring it up 1.5, enter, space bar to end the tool, and then group this into one piece. So again, I got to kind of orbit myself around, holding the scroll wheel down like a button, so I can get some type of vantage point where I can grab just this guy. And that's where I also need to make sure I'm going left to right. Right click, make it into a group. Or what I could have also done, so I'm going to click on this object and I'm going to delete it. I could have taken this bottom plate that I already made, and I could do Control C to copy, Control V to paste, place it somewhere for the time being, and then grab it by a corner to put it onto that corner, because the bottom plate and the top plate in this scenario are exactly the same. Before I go to make it into this next wall here, because this wall over here is going to be exactly the same, I'm actually going to take all of these separate groups and I'm going to group them together into their own group to make it easy just to copy that whole thing across. So I'm going to look at my object from one of the side views. I could do it from the right or left. It just makes it a little easier to face it head on. I'm going to hit the space bar to go into my select tool, and I'm going to drag and try to only get my wall here, which I did. So I orbit it around to just check that. And then I'm going to right click and say make a group. And so I now have a group of all of my separate groups. And so I can take this, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and I could just place it somewhere for the time being. I'm going to hold my scroll wheel to orbit around. And then while in the move tool, which when you Control Z, Control V to copy paste something, it tends to put you into the move tool automatically. So I'm just going to grab it by this point and put it on that point. So now I just have 2 copies of this. And if I wanted to paint it, since it's all grouped, it'll be really easy. You actually don't have to go into the bucket tool to start the paint. If I just come over here and click on a color, it'll put me in the paint tool automatically. And because all of these are grouped, I can just paint them really, really, really fast. I'll hit the space bar to get out of the paint bucket tool. My next recommendation would be to get rid of these guides. The more guides we have in our drawing, the more confusing things tend to get within our drawing. So they're really helpful for when you're working with them, but once you're done with them, we kind of want to get rid of them. So you could click on each guide and then use the delete key. You can also window around them like that and hit the delete key. Or you can go into the not view tab, the edit tab. And within the edit tab at the top, there is this pure delete guides tool, which just gets rid of every single guide for each and every one of them. Next, we will work on putting in our front pieces or our front and back pieces. They did them in a different color. I'm going to keep mine in the same color. The kind of only thing we have regarding the spacing of these is that there's going to be a 3-foot wide door in the middle of it. So in SketchUp, I'm going to draw in my bottom plate. I'm going to go into the rectangle tool, which is keyboard shortcut R, or this button here. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle from that corner. And I'm going to hold my scroll wheel to orbit around to this corner. As long as this rectangle that's being highlighted before I click is blue, I know I'm flat on that face, so I know I'm good to go. I'm going to hold the shift key and the scroll wheel down to just pan myself a bit. And then I'm going to use push-pull, which is keyboard shortcut P, to bring this up. And I could type in 1.5, or I could also bring it up to the same point of this group here. Considering that this is already 1.5, I don't have to take that measurement. And then you guessed it, I'm going to group this. So I'm going to hit the space bar. I'm going to highlight a kind of long, skinny rectangle to just only get that piece. And then I'm going to right click, make it into a group. I'm going to put a stud in here. I could do it where, but this seems like a little bit of an out of the way to do this, in which I could double click on this wall. So now I'm in this group. I could click on this stud, Control C to copy, double click outside of this wall, Control V to paste it. I could then put it down. I could use the rotate tool, which is located here, or what is the keyboard shortcut for it? It's because it's not R. I don't know the keyboard shortcut for rotate, so sorry. But I could click on it here. I could grab it by a point as long as this protractor is blue and go from the red axis. So I'll click again to the green axis and I'll click again. And then I could move this into place. That seems to me like a little bit of an out of the way of going about making that stud, because the way I would do it is I would go into the rectangle tool, keyboard shortcut R, from that corner, and as long as my square or rectangle is blue, well, I'm going to do it. And sometimes I forget which number down here means what. So whenever I forget that, I usually just make a long skinny one. And so now I know that the first number is going to be my length or my width going, in this case, sort of right to left, and the second number is my up and down. So I'm going to make it 1.5, comma 3.5, enter. Just when I make that long skinny rectangle, I can read those numbers to say, okay, one of those is feet, one of those is inches. And then I'm going to use the push-pull tool, so keyboard shortcut P, to bring this up. And I could type 6 foot, or I could click on that edge. And then you guessed it, I'm going to group it. So I'm going to orbit myself around, just holding the scroll wheel down so I get a vantage point to make it easy to just get just that piece. I'll hit the space bar to go into the select tool, and then I'm just going to draw, click and drag a long skinny window around it to only get that piece. Right click on it and make it a group. You'll know if you accidentally group something else in it. So I'm going to Control Z to just undo making it into a group. Is that if I try and let's say I get that part all in it, if I right click and make this into a group, see how that box that is making a bounding box around it is like, when I go to click on here, everything else gets highlighted, or that box is much larger than I intend it to be. That's kind of my way of knowing I grouped something in there that I didn't want to. So I'm just going to Control Z to undo that. I'm going to redo it. I could also look at it straight from the front to give me an easy vantage point of, let's highlight just that piece, right click, make it a group. And then I'm going to Control C to copy, Control V to paste, place it somewhere, then grab it by a point you know of where you want that point to be. And I can also work in my opening here. So within my tape measure tool, I'm going to do just a guide over from like one of those edges. This time I want to make sure I'm getting a red arrow when I pull my guide out. And what I want to do is I want to pull it until it reaches a midpoint. And it's going to snap to when it's on that midpoint. So I'm going to click to place this guide. So now I know I'm in the middle. And then I'm going to create a guide out from there, which, let's go back into tape measure. Click on that line, making sure I'm getting that red arrow, knowing that I'm flat. And I'm going to go 1.5 feet, or I could also type 1'6", or I could type 18, enter. And then from this way, still making sure I'm getting that red arrow, 1.5 feet. And what that is going to do is tell me where the edges of these studs need to be on these sides of where my door is going to go. So I'll hit my space bar to get out of the guide tool. I'll Control V to paste. Since the last thing I copied was this stud, I don't have to click on it and Control C again. Click somewhere to place it. Grab it by a point I know. of where I want that point to be. So I want that corner sitting there. Control V to paste, place it somewhere for the time being, grab it by a point I know of where I want that point to be. And then I'll put in my top plate. So I'll hit the space bar. I'm going to just copy this bottom piece. So I'm going to click on it, Control C, Control V, place it somewhere for the time being, grab it by a point I know, and then where do I want that point to sit? Space bar to end the tool. And then I'm going to look at it from the front. So I'm just going to grab onto that front view. You can also get to these views without this menu up here. If you go into Camera, Standard Views, we have all of these ones here. And then I'm going to use the Select tool. So I'll hit the space bar. And I'm just going to draw a pretty tight window around just those groups or just those components. So I'm just going to window around them, right click, make that into a group. So I could easily Control C, Control V it onto the backside of this building. So I pasted it, just placed it somewhere. Now I'm going to grab it by that corner and put it on this corner. And I need to paint it too. And I do kind of like painting things as I go. Sometimes I'll wait till the very end to do it. That can be kind of your personal preference. All right. And so we're going to ignore our kind of braces that are going on within here or within this particular drawing. Things too, like if you're going to have brackets, you can draw them in yourself manually, or you can use the 3D warehouse, which we're going to use to put in things like our awning windows, our door, as well as some plants and features in there. And we'll get started on our roof. So within our roof, we have a few measurements that were given. So on the very longest edge here, we're at 87 1/4 inches. And then in this one here, from edge to where it meets here, we're at, let's see, 67 1/2. But I actually am pretty sure from the first time I went around, all I really had to do was measure this one out. And then I just kind of put that one in wherever it fit or wherever it was placed. So I'm going to look at my drawing or my object straight from the front. And I'm going to use my tape measure tool to actually draw a guide at an angle. So I'm going to go into my tape measure, which is right here, or keyboard shortcut T. I'm going to click on that point. And then, why isn't it letting me do an angle? Let me do an angle last time. Weird. Unless I want the protractor tool, which I sure do. So whoops, my bad on that one. So I'm going to go into protractor. I'm going to click on this corner. I'm going to go click straight over, and then I'll say that I want my angle of, I believe it was 60. Enter. I feel like it's definitely not 60. That looks way too much. This cuts at 60 degrees, so it's 30. My mistake. So I'm going to Control Z to undo. Click on that edge. Click here, and I want an angle of 30 degrees. And so this is essentially telling me where my first edge of this is sitting. And what I can do instead of drawing that rectangle out and over is I can use the tape measure tool to make a guide from this line parallel down the 3 1/2, which I did 3.4. So this is now just, I want to orbit to make sure I stayed flat, which I believe I did. It looks like I did. Okay, good. Good. And we'll look at it from the front. I'm then, instead of going to draw a rectangle, I'm going to use the line tool, which is up here, or keyboard shortcut L. And I'm going to go from that endpoint, just following on this guide, that 87.25. And then I'm going to go straight down straight over to where it intersects there, and then straight over here. So this is making this piece. And let me go into the right software. Before I start putting in my other rafter over here, I'm going to use the push-pull tool. So I'm going to go keyboard shortcut P, and I'm going to bring this out. Let me orbit around a little bit. 1.5. And then I'm going to group that. So this way I don't accidentally mess it up. So I'll hit space. I'm going to draw a little square or rectangle around it. Right click, make group. It is going to be a much larger bounding box because of the fact that this object is at that angle, but that's okay. We still have it how we want it to look or how we want it to be. Then I'm going to go to the front view. I'm going to use my protractor tool again. So I'm going to click on protractor, and while it's green, I'm going to click on that endpoint, go straight out. So I'll click again, and then I'm going to do an angle of 30. And then I'm going to use my tape measure tool, which is keyboard shortcut T. Click on this line, and I'm going to bring it down. So with this one, I didn't take any measurements from, because all I'm going to do to make this rafter is I'm going to draw a line from point 1 to point 2, 3, 4, and then back to point 1. So I've been able to figure out where that one's going to sit based on where this one is. I'll use push-pull, keyboard shortcut P to bring that out, 1.5, and then I'm also going to group that one together so I don't accidentally mess anything about it up. This one's going to be a little harder to get just that group, so I'm going to hit the space bar, and I'm going to draw a rectangle, just getting only that bit, right-click on it, make a group. Then I believe the last thing we're going to do for these rafters before we start copying and paste them is put in this little spacer here. So it's just going straight down from there, 3.5 over, straight up. So I didn't use as many measurements as they did because I can get those measurements on the computer. If I was going to have to physically build this, I'd probably need quite a few measurements, but the computer is going to help us quite a bit along the way. So since these are two individual groups, I'm going to draw a line just from this corner straight down, and then I'm going to use my tape measure tool to bring this straight over, making sure I'm getting that red, 3.5. And then I'm going to go back into the line tool. 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you guessed it, I'm going to push-pull that out. So I'm going to go keyboard shortcut P, and I'm going to bring it out 1.5. Or I could click on that group endpoint to just bring it out that exact amount of where I've already brought these ones. Hit the space bar, highlight it, right-click, make it a group. So everything I always make groups as I'm working through it. And then I no longer need these guides to finish up these rafters. So I'm going to edit, delete guides. And before I start spacing out these rafters here, I'm going to make the rafters themselves into a group, like all 3 of these together into a group, so that way I can just easily copy it along the way. And if I wanted to, it would be smart to go into the paint bucket tool and paint them beforehand, so that way when I copy and paste them, they already have that color applied. I've been doing it after the fact, but we can do it beforehand. So I'm going to make all 3 of these into one group. What I could do is window around all 3 of them real carefully. Because of the fact that these are pretty big groups, as long as I'm going left to right, I can get a pretty big window and still only get those 3. Or I can click on this group, hold the control, click on this group, still holding the control key, click on this group, right click, make a group, and now this whole rafter piece is one group. And I can copy and paste it. So Control C to copy it, Control V to paste. I'm just going to place it somewhere. And then I'm going to grab it by a point I know. And where do I want that point to sit? So what I'm doing here is I'm hovering over that because I just want this rafter to sit right on top of where that one sits. Paste, place it, grab it by a point. But sometimes it can be a little tricky to do this. Hover over it. It doesn't seem to want to actually. There we go. Another way I could approach it too is, since I know that this spacing from like here to here is going to be 21 inches, I could look at it directly from the top and I could do Control V to paste. I can put this right on top of its existing one, and then in the move tool, move it. As long as I'm highlighting that green edge, I can say I want to move it 21 over. And so it just made it 21 inches over. Control V to paste, put it directly on top of the existing one, then click on it, move it 21 over. So that's another way I could do this with my rafter spacing. Since sometimes, as I've mentioned, it can get a little picky about picking it up at a point and hovering over to track where it would meet. So that's a similar feature like AutoCAD. Paste, place it somewhere, click on the endpoint you know, hover over, click where that would meet, paste, place it somewhere, and that paste is Control V. Hover over that endpoint, move it up to see where it would meet, Control V to paste it, and this time I'm going to click on this edge, and I'm just going to put it right on that corner. So now I have the rafters ready to go and done. And I'm ready to start adding in some of my features for like my little windows and pieces up here. Next up with our rafters, as we've already got our little spacing here for the frame, we have some 2x2s that we're going to put in at the top and bottom. One thing of note is I am going to group them and I am going to copy and paste them along, but because of the fact that from our first rafter, or from our first stud, we're going across from face of to middle is that 21, and then it's 21 from here to here, is the one that fits within here is just going to be slightly smaller. So we are just going to have to make a little bit of an adjustment as we go. So I'm going to put my first 2x2 in. I'm going to orbit myself around to just look at this one here. And I'm going to draw a rectangle from this corner. As long as it's staying that green color, that means I'm good. And I'm going to do 1.5, comma, 1.5. I'm going to use the push-pull tool, which is here, keyboard shortcut P, to bring this to this face right here. So I'm just going to click to end it. I'm going to make it into a group. So I'm going to hit the space bar to get out of the rectangle tool. I'm going to click and drag, right click, make a group. And then I'm going to copy and paste it to sit also down here. Let me just make sure I'm putting them in the same spot that they're going to have theirs put in. Okay. I know where they're putting theirs. So I'm going to click on this group, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, place it somewhere, grab it by this corner, place it then on that corner. That's where the start of kind of my window frame is going to go. The issue is when I go to paste this up here, of kind of what I described. So I'm going to grab it by that bottom corner onto here. And see how it's too short now? Easy fix of I'm going to hit the space bar to get out of the move tool. I'm going to double click on this object or on this group. And so now it has that box around it. I'm going to go into the push pull tool, which is keyboard shortcut P, or this button. I'm just going to bring that face out to here. So I can just edit this one and it's going to make no changes to this one at all. And then I'll hit the space bar to get out of push pull. I'll double click off the object to exit it. And I will take this one, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. I'll place it somewhere, which I placed it very far away. I'm going to grab it by that corner, orbit and pan my way over and put it here. I can also, with these window frames, what would make sense to me is to select both of them. So I'm going to select this one and then hit Control and select this one. And then I'm going to right click and group those two groups together so I can copy and paste them as kind of one part. See, sometimes you think you're pasting something close and then it's surprise you're not. I'm going to grab it by that corner to put it on that corner. Paste. Grab it by this bottom corner, put it here. Paste. And just like with a lot of the software that we cover in this course, my way is not necessarily the only way to do this. You could draw each one of these pieces out. You could do a bunch of different things. For this last one, I am going to copy and paste my first one since this one's a little bit smaller. So I'm going to take both of these. I clicked on one. I held Control and clicked on the other. Control C to copy, Control V to paste. Even though these aren't grouped, they'll still move together because they were both selected at the same time. And then I have those window frames started in for here. And I believe my next step is I'm going to put in windows and doors. Yes. So within some of the windows and doors in the instructions, they are going to go over like how to actually create them and build them out yourselves. And you could do that for the door and you could do that for the window. But what I really want to make sure that we have a good understanding of in particularly this software is a feature called the 3D warehouse. So within the 3D warehouse, you can get to it in the quick or in the large tool set. It's kind of located down here a bit, or you could go into the window tool 3D warehouse and that will open it. You do need to make an account with SketchUp in order to use the 3D warehouse. So you do have to have a Trimble account. It's completely free and there is a sign in with Google option, but within here, this is kind of like how CAD blocks function where we can find different things that either other people have made or other manufacturers have made and put up on here in order for us to use and kind of want to look at that later. I was just like, ooh, that framing extension looks cool. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to search up at the top for an awning window. By default now, it's going to put me into products, which again, these are coming from manufacturers. If I want to look at models that other people have made, I can also just go into models. I usually prefer models because I get a little bit more simplistic looking stuff. You want to be a little wary about putting things that are too detailed into your projects because then they start to make your work look a little worse if then all of these other details added to it are just like super duper, just almost way too nice. I believe these were the ones that I used in the first one that I did a practice of, so I'm going to just download this. And do I want to load it directly into my model? Yes, I do. And it's just going to allow me to place it somewhere. And this is one of those scenarios where I'm going to click somewhere to place it. And then I'm going to grab it by a point I know. of where do I want that point to sit. And so I'm just going to put it right into that corner. One thing you probably notice about this awning window is it's much too large to fit into the opening we have. So we are going to use the scale tool to fix that. So while I still have the object selected, I use keyboard shortcut S or this button right here. And when I go to scale it, I'm going to grab it by this middle diagonal and I'm going to move it into the group that I want it to be. So I can do a scale by the middle top of making something shorter or taller. I can do it based on a middle side to make it smaller this way. I like the middle diagonal because I can easily just kind of snap it into another point. And I can do Control C, Control V to copy this new size one. I'm going to grab it by this corner and I'm just going to pan over. So I'm holding Shift in the scroll wheel to put that one in here. Because remember, these two are just going to be slightly smaller. Then I'm going to paste this window again, but I'm going to grab it by this corner and put it here. And this one I'm going to need to scale to a different size because it's going to be too skinny for this particular window. So I'm going to, while I have the window selected, I'm going to use S for the scale tool. And this one I could do just based off of this middle and just grab it to where it's on that edge. Since my height isn't changing, just my width. Or I could have done it by the diagonal as well. I'm going to copy paste, place it somewhere, grab it by a point I know. Where do I want that point to sit? Control V to paste, place it somewhere, grab it by a point I know. Where do I want that point to sit? Paste. Maybe you're catching on that I'm often grabbing it by a point I know and placing it where I want that point to be. And occasionally I do have to just kind of reset my view or orbit around a little bit to be able to really kind of get it into a particular point. And then I have these windows detailed in up here. And I'm going to do the same thing with the door. I'm going to find a door on the 3D warehouse instead of building my own door out, though I could absolutely build a door out if I wanted to. So to get into the 3D warehouse is either this button here or within the window tab. And I'm just going to search for screen door. And if you're in products by default, it's just these are usually going to be a little bit too much for what we need, especially like in this project. So I'm going to go into the models. I'm going to see if I can find, I believe this was the door I used in my first practice. So it's going to be the door that I choose again. I'm going to download it. You don't have to pick the ones that I use as well. I'm going to place it in my model just somewhere. Grab it by a point I know. Where do I want that point to sit? And then in the case of this door, it is 3 foot wide, but it is a little bit too tall for what we're looking for. So then I'm going to go into the scale tool, which is here, or keyboard shortcut S. And I'm going to zoom in so I can make sure I get it on that center. And I'm just going to pull it down until I'm on the edge of the group. And now the object is shorter. One thing is that the person who made this has this guide in here, which when I hit the space bar and I click off of it, that guide is going to remain. Or is this door too wide? Actually, this door is a little bit too skinny, so we need to scale it in that direction too. So I'll do scale. This one's going to be a little hard, but I can see if I get in close, I can find that middle one. And I'm just going to do it to the edge of that group. Maybe didn't catch that the first time around. But this guide issue here, if I hit space and I double click on the door, now I can take this guide and I can delete it and I can get rid of it. Would it have been the end of the world if it was there? No, but visually it was pretty annoying to kind of look at. So My final step of completing the greenhouse itself would be to add in the glass, or rather it's going to actually be plastic on a greenhouse, but we're going to draw it as glass here on our walls. Because of the fact that all of our walls and our door and our windows are all groups, we are going to be able to just kind of draw a singular face on top of them and then just give it a paint of the glass. And so to do that, I'm going to go into the rectangle tool, which is keyboard shortcut R, or this button here. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle from one end to the other, making sure it's staying highlighted red. And it's just a single face. We're not going to push pull it or anything. Instead, I'm going to go into my paint, and I'm going to go into the glass and mirrors. And I used the translucent tinted. So I use this glass to just paint this face into my my greenhouse. We could do a couple of different colors. We probably don't want, all right, it looks like I didn't pick it. I was like, we probably don't want this mirror one. I found this one looked at least the most greenhouse lookingest, even though it's a piece of glass, not a translucent piece of plastic. For my other walls, like this one, I did a rectangle from here to here, this time making sure it's staying this green color. Place my glass, and then I did a separate rectangle for the roof. So I did a line, and I just did a rectangle from 1 to in that area, and then placed a color, and I'll also have to do another one here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Which one? Well, I guess 0.1, because I was like, wait a minute, 4 would be not a triangle. Anywho, you guys probably just want me to finish, so I'll hush up soon. I promise. For my roofs, I started running into a little bit of a snag trying to get to be nice and flat on each side of the roof. So what I did for the roof was I did use the rectangle tool. I started in this corner, and then I went to this one, and see how I'm staying green? But then once I try to go down here, it won't give me that nice green rectangle. So what I did instead was I kind of just brought it down to the middle. Then I hit the space bar. I clicked on just this bottom edge, and I used the move tool to just move only the bottom edge down, straight down, flat onto the group, which it doesn't seem like I am going straight. Maybe if I grab it by a midpoint. Click on this edge, move. Where was the midpoint? It's probably right there. So if I bring it straight down, it just stays completely flat on it. And then I can go into my paint and paint that. And I did the same thing here on this back edge, where I did a rectangle from this one corner, kept it green for as long as I could get it to remain green, but it kept wanting to snap to other points. And then I hit the space bar, I clicked on this edge, M for move, grabbed it by its midpoint, which would probably be seen right here in the middle of that middle stud, makes sense, or middle rafter. And then I want to move it onto this midpoint, if it'll let me. Because I do just want to keep moving it flat. See how sometimes, like, it's now just getting all wonky, wavy. I might have to escape and go back into it. Well, I definitely didn't put that on the midpoint of that one. There we go. And then paint. And I'll do the same thing to this front. For these ones, I would do each one of these walls is on each side of the door as its own rectangle. So that way I keep my door. And then one of the final steps, I'm not going to do each and every single one of those paints because it is just, or rectangles for the piece of glass because it is a little bit repetitive. I want to try to keep the video as short as possible. Is we need to add in some landscaping. So for that, our landscaping will be, we'll put in a big old rectangle. So I'll go into my rectangle tool. From here to here, looks beautiful. And then for my materials, you'll choose one of those grasses. And additionally, what you've been asked to is to put in some plants or different features that would go inside of the greenhouse. So those can be found in the 3D warehouse. If I search for like vegetable beds. Huh, really? There's a couple. There's these palette painters. Did I spell vegetable wrong or something? I don't think so. I did. Maybe that's why I couldn't find vegetables, because I spelled it wrong. Wow, look at me go. Here we go. I was just like, I was very surprised that there were no vegetable beds at all. If I wanted to put this, I can download it, load it into my model. I'll give it a second to load in because it might just be that it's a little bit not complex, but maybe a little detailed. It's not responding, but I'm going to wait. I'm going to be patient. Maybe not. Maybe I just crashed it. What a wonderful way to end it. But I would want to load some of those in. And it looks like I'm not going to be able to load this one in because of the fact that this model is going to crash it. Which is a little bit of a bummer because I also didn't save my work at all while I was working. So if I, here we go. See, it didn't. I just had to be a little patient. So I'm going to place it over here and then I can grab it by a point to put it on a point within my garden, within my piece. One thing with yours, which, whoops, see, look at where my land is too. Sometimes when we orbit around, we find a lot of real wonderful things. So I'm actually going to delete my piece of land for a second. Whoa, I'll do my land last. But sometimes when we want to put things inside of buildings or inside of objects, we have a really hard time of trying to move this, you know, into place where it's sitting nice and flat and flush. So what I recommend doing is first looking at your object from the front, so that way we can at least line up where's the bottom of this bed with where my floor sits. So I'm just aligning it to that floor. And then I'm actually going to use a tool called the section cut, where I can slice my building open and get rid of my roof. So the section cut is located right here, which, whoops, I went into scale. I'm going to do a section cut. I want to keep it blue. So I'm going to click once I have a blue plane, and then I'm going to use the move tool to move this up. So all this is doing is it's just going to cut my roof off temporarily. So that way when I look at my object from above, it'll just be a little bit easier to move this into place of where I want it to go. And hopefully I haven't moved it on a height, which it looks like I sure did. We can also do section cuts because that still looks like to me like it's floating. Now it's sitting underneath. You can do section cuts on horizontals as well. So I just clicked on that cut and I deleted it. I can do any other section plane. If I do it based on a red one, I'll be able to move this on a horizontal, so I can cut parts of the building away in that direction. So as I'm trying to move things into place around my building, I can use that section cut as kind of a helpful guide to make sure that I've got stuff actually placed in there. What would have been helpful to put that garden bed in the right spot would be if my floor or my ground was actually in line. So I looked at my object directly from the top, and let's draw our rectangle. And there we go. It's actually on my building. So that's good. I'll put my grass texture on it. Just because that's going to be something where when I go to place an object in, and I'll do another section plane on my blue, I'll use move to move it up. When I go to place objects in, they're going to kind of want to snap to things like the face of this. And I'm also going to highlight, well, I actually can't make that into a group. It's only just one face, but I should be okay. So now let's try again, go into the warehouse. I'm going to pick a different vegetable bed than this guy just because it did make my thing a little bit angry. Let's try this one, this 4x8. Let's see if that freezes my SketchUp. It's not responding, but it's not frozen yet. If I do wait, eventually it'll come in. Part of it for me is my computer recording and trying to do these tasks at the same time. But if I'm here, we go. So it brought it in as these two. Let's say I don't want both of these. Let's say I just only wanted the one. I can hit the space bar. I can double click on it, and they have it as kind of these two different groups. So I could get rid of this group. I could get rid of those pieces of vegetation. And now I just only have the one. And I could use the move tool to grab it by a point I know. Where do I want that point to sit? And because of the fact that I had that ground, it kind of stayed on the bottom. And then I can also look at it directly from the top to kind of move it into place a little bit more. But now I've smashed it into the ground by moving it there. So sometimes we gotta be a little careful when we go to move it. But since it's on that green axis, I know that I'm only moving just in the green. And then this way, since I'm on the red, I'm not moving anything related to height. So I can kind of move my different parts or pieces around. So that's a very quick demonstration, explanation of this greenhouse and of this building. When you're all done, please make sure you have deleted these sections. So that's just hit the space bar, click on the section and hit delete. Make sure you also have all of your greenhouse covering on all of the sides. I know I didn't show that, but I'd prefer if you have it there on each one. And I'll see you in the next video.